No, I'm not. Hello, dearest friends, and welcome to part 7 of my introduction to philosophy. Thanks so much for joining me again, and to those who just discovered my channel, a very warm welcome. Whether this is your first time here or not, I just want to remind everybody that what you're watching is the 7th episode in a series that seeks to familiarize all of you, regardless of educational background, with the basics of European philosophy. I suggest that you watch all videos and in the right order, because each part builds on what has been said in the previous ones. For your convenience, I have created a playlist in which everything is properly organized. You can find the link in the description below. To help you even further, on my website for every single topic of discussion, I included a list of orienting readings. In general, if you like what I'm doing here, I would highly appreciate if you subscribe to this channel and allow its notifications. In this way, you'll get my videos as soon as I'm posting them. I plan to share with you many more exciting materials on philosophy, religion, literature, photography, film, political theory, and history. Your support remains inestimable. I really hope to see you again. No matter what, I'm deeply grateful for any of your time and interest. In part 6, I try to give you an idea as to what epistemology, otherwise known as theory of knowledge, entails. Our main preoccupation there has been with our relation to the outside world, while asking whether we can know anything with certainty. On the same occasion, when I alluded to the limitations of epistemology, I suggested that the nature of a human being goes beyond the possibility of discovering any objective truth. And that is because the human universe includes things like meanings, values, ideals, and spiritual beliefs. Our existence does not revolve around external objects only. We also have an inner life, which in the old days used to be called the soul. Today, we name it personality or self. Call it what you like. The point is that besides being physically present in the world, we humans possess a unique, invisible identity. We have emotions and desires. We imagine things and plan for the future. Furthermore, we have a vital connection with the past, which is why our memories are usually filled with gratitude, nostalgia, regret, frustration, or even anger. Consequently, our actions in and reactions to the world around us are fundamentally determined by this intangible, free, and unpredictable reality, which is our inwardness. Epistemology is almost completely silent about this side of human existence. For the most part, theories of knowledge ignore that the way in which we perceive and therefore understand the external world is never neutral. Rather, it is filtered at all times by the place we live in, by our age, and by the internal contents of our consciousness, namely our feelings, memories, fancy, practical concerns, and life goals. To put it very simply, epistemology overlooks our distinct subjectivity, which, let's be honest, always feels much more real than any so-called objective reality. And that is not all. Another limitation of epistemology is that it doesn't take into account that aside from being self-conscious and very different individuals, we are also deeply social. Interactions with and reliance on one another are what defines us as a species. In this sense, we should always remember what biologists have to say, namely, that we have come to dominate our planet thanks to not just the size of our brain, but also due to our ability to collaborate with one another in solving problems and to help each other in times of need. In fact, when isolated, the human individual has very little chance to survive, let alone thrive. By contrast, when congregating in bands, tribes, or much larger groups like a village, a city, a country, or even the global community, humans are, as history amply proves it, unrivaled. and that regarding not just mere survival, but also the surreal improvement of our life quality. In sum, what I mean to say is that there is something irreducibly personal and something fundamentally interpersonal about every one of us. We are not just thinking things as classical epistemologists portray us. In addition, we are existing individuals with incredibly intricate inner lives who live in society side by side with other equally complex individuals. Knowing this, we can say that human existence has a threefold relational structure. We are intrinsically, continually, and simultaneously connected with 1. The outside world, 2. With our inward selves, and 3. With other fellow humans. Given its standard object of inquiry, epistemology can deal only with the first dimension. The other 2 dimensions constitute the object of different complementary fields. In modern times, our relation to ourselves or our interiority represents the object of psychology, whereas sociologists study the way people relate to each other. However, from time immemorial, philosophy had several disciplines which dealt with the exact same issues. One has been philosophical psychology, which sought to understand the structure and inner workings of our subjective experience from a more holistic and less scientific perspective. Among the philosophical disciplines that have reflected upon our social interaction, we count ethics and political philosophy. Although a fascinating field to which I hope to return one day, I'm afraid I have to skip philosophical psychology. Political theory has to wait until part 8 of the current series. For now, let us delve head-on into the deep waters of ethics. 3 brief caveats before starting. First, in what follows, the word ethical and moral, or ethics and morality, will be used interchangeably. In the philosophical literature, there is a slight difference between these 2 terms, but that difference is too small to concern us here. Secondly, as with metaphysics and epistemology, I will cover only a tiny portion of the rich and long history of ethical reflections in the West. In terms of actual theories, I will overview 4 of them, 1 ancient and 3 modern, all absolutely indispensable to any consideration of our subject. These theories should give you an idea concerning the importance, variety, and depth of the ethical philosophies that the European culture has preserved throughout the ages. Needless to say, and this is the 3rd proviso, the Eastern civilizations have left us an equally formidable body of literature, which I plan to address in a separate course dedicated to religion. Given the goals and scope of the present series, we will have to limit ourselves to the Western ambience. As always, I want to begin with the key questions of our discipline. After that, I will draw a brief, though pretty comprehensive picture of the internal division of ethics itself. Regarding its central concerns, these are: 1. What is the nature of moral values in general, and of good and evil or right and wrong in particular? Are such values universal or local? That is, should they be recognized and followed by everyone, or do they vary from culture to culture? Also, how do ethical values come into being? That is, who creates them and for what purpose? 2. Is human freedom real or not? Are we truly free agents, or does our biology dictate our behavior? If we are nothing but a series of physical and chemical processes, how can we be held responsible for our decisions and acts? On the other hand, if we are genuinely free, to what extent do our physical nature and social environs determine our thoughts and actions? And should human freedom be real, is responsibility exclusively individual, or can we talk about such a thing as collective responsibility too? 3. How should we act in society? Do we always have to conform to social norms and public morality? Should the answer be yes, What if one lives in a society which is fundamentally immoral or even criminal, for instance, under a totalitarian government? If the answer were no, when exactly should we ignore or even transgress the mores and accepted ethical values of a given community? On the other hand, how should society itself deal with immoral behavior? Should it just tolerate it? But how far can this tolerance go without running the danger of societal collapse? Another important question here is, should we ever strive to attain a perfectly moral society? Implicitly, should we try to eradicate every single immoral attitude or act for the sake of this lofty ideal? 4. What is the relationship between religion and ethics? Can an ethical system be completely atheistic, or does it require a spiritual commitment of sorts? In other words, do we need to believe in God or to embrace a religious set of values in order to behave morally? If not, what are the ultimate foundations of an atheistic morality? More exactly, how should such a morality choose or conceive its values, principles, and aspirations? 5. What is the nature of violence in relation to evil? Is violence inherently bad, or are there any profitable forms of violence? Next, what is the adequate response to violence at the level of both individuals and society? Should we attempt to eliminate or prohibit all of its forms by any means and at all costs? In a slightly different perspective, is humankind inherently violent? If not, how do we become violent? Is it something in our genetic makeup that predisposes us to brutal acts, or is it our social environment? Next, assuming that everyone does have a violent potential, could we ever hope to achieve a lasting global peace, or is war an inescapable reality of human history? Speaking of which, is war unambiguously evil, or can we differentiate between just and unjust wars? And if some countries choose to avoid war at all costs, is there any guarantee that violence will not increase in other parts of the world? Although many of these questions may sound unanswerable, ethicists have struggled for centuries to offer legitimate and solidly argued responses. Some of these responses have proven more true or more insightful than others. Many of them, even if flawed, have given rise to new and fruitful challenges. Whatever the case, you should remember that absolutely every single one of them has yet to receive a definitive answer. Such queries will probably keep us awake for many a night to come. But in spite of all setbacks, we should never quit to wrestle with their possibly invincible angel. Now, you may remember from previous videos that another way to understand any philosophical discipline is to describe its types. This is true especially of the ethical domain, whose problems, topics, and implications are much more varied and vital to human existence than, say, metaphysics. Therefore, what I'm going to do next is briefly describe how ethical theories have been classified on the basis of their content or object. I have already promised to offer a more complete picture in this regard. But remember that what I have to say will not be enough to claim any thoroughness. As always, my aim is to plant in your minds that seed of curiosity which might induce you to find out more about whatever resonates with your deepest moral interests. The list of books and materials suggested on my website should be of help for starters too. All warnings aside, here's how historians of philosophy have parceled out the rich philosophical terrain of ethics. The biggest divide is that between theoretical and applied ethics. As the name suggests, theoretical are those ethical reflections that address very broad and universal moral issues. The earliest and most important theory in this regard is virtue ethics. We'll return to it in great detail in the next session when we discuss Aristotle's ethical system. For now, suffice it to say that virtue ethics assesses the kind of persons we are and describes the kind of persons we should become. Most importantly, this type of theory argues that personal flourishing and happiness are the main tasks of life. At the same time, it equates happiness not with pleasure, but with moral behavior and rational control of passions. Other than Aristotle, important advocates of virtue theory are Plato, the Stoic masters Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, and such modern thinkers as Spinoza and Nietzsche. This class of ethical investigations is by far the oldest and most long-standing. In fact, contemporary times have known a resurgence of interest in it thanks to both its almost timeless and universal relevance and its practical character. The second group of ethical theories is called deontological, because it emphasizes the moral duties and rules of behavior that ought to guide our choices and actions. Such normative theories tend to set aside the ideal defended by many virtue ethicists of harmonizing pleasure or desire with our so-called higher capacities. Instead, deontologists stress the importance of denying desire and privilege a self-sacrificial pursuit of duty. The father and most exemplary representative of this tradition is someone we have already encountered. He is the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, whose epistemology we expanded upon in Part 6. Granted his indispensability to the subject at hand, we cannot but return to Kant's ethics in Session 3. Thirdly, we have the Utilitarian school. Also known as Pragmatism, this ethical current insists on the crucial importance of actions and especially of their consequences. Utilitarians believe that acts, goals, and decisions can be deemed morally right not because they conform to some duty or because they stem from virtuous behavior, but rather because their consequences in real life prove beneficial. For something to be good, they add, it must maximize the well-being of both the individual and the community around him or her. I will have more to say about these issues in the fourth session of this part when I cover John Stuart Mill's ethics. This holy or unholy trinity of virtue, deontological, and utilitarian ethics falls under the category of theoretical ethics. The next big class is conventionally called applied ethics. That's because starting sometime in the second half of the 20th century, thinkers and scholars began to focus more and more on the application of generic ethical principles to particular aspects and problems of modern life. As a result, the following four domains have arisen and actually dominate the moral philosophical landscape of today. First, bioethics. This field targets first and foremost healthcare institutions and the practice of medicine in developed countries. In a purely deontological fashion, it deals with the obligations of physicians to their patients. However, similarly to proponents of virtue ethics, bioethicists wish to discover what makes a good doctor too. And this is not all, for bioethics also explores critical issues in medical research, for instance, confidentiality or informed consent, as well as the moral standards that should govern any discovery of curative or preventive therapies. As regards clinical medicine, bioethicists debate such burning and complex topics as abortion, end-of-life care, and euthanasia. Moreover, the same group of scholars struggles with the ethical dilemmas generated by the latest developments in biotechnology. The most well-known of these dilemmas concern stem cell research, genetic engineering, cloning, artificial reproductive technologies, and nanoimplants. Yet another branch of bioethics engages with the challenges posed by healthcare delivery and services in underdeveloped nations. This branch tries to find practical, urgent, and morally acceptable solutions to the lack of healthcare in the most impoverished areas of the planet. And if that wasn't enough, bioethics has also significantly broadened its scope to include issues related to religion, law, social science, and even literature. Moving on, one cannot talk about applied ethics without mentioning the philosophical tradition and social movement of feminism. The history of feminist ethics and politics is much older than the date I suggested above. Yet it's still the case that feminist thinkers and activists identify many reasons to justify their continued activity. Of course, in this context, I cannot but oversimplify things. Even so, I would say that in general, feminist ethicists usually reject traditional moral values, rules, and systems. That is because they consider these systems exclusively patriarchal, and therefore particularly oppressive towards women. This constitutes the critical side of feminist thought. In consequence, the scholars of this field try to identify ways to redress the myriad injustices women have been and are still exposed to from a social, economic, and cultural standpoint. This is part of the emancipatory project of feminist ethic. Another equally important aspect is the attempt to identify ways of thinking and acting ethically which are distinctly feminine. This effort to rethink altogether the status of women is, I would say, the purely constructive side of feminism. Its aim is to create a social ethos in which women can freely flourish in all aspects of life and which unambiguously repudiates the stultifying domestic and maternal roles women have been subjected to in our male-dominated past. The third set of applied ethical systems falls under the rubric of business ethics. This body of scholarship has a critical side too, which consists in identifying the egregious faults of corporate culture, for example, various forms of exploitation. Specifically, business ethics unmasks abusive policies envisioned or implemented by international businesses and corrupt governments. Business ethics scholars also attack any manifestation of discrimination or harassment. Last but not least, they draw attention to manipulative strategies in advertisement and unambiguously oppose profit-centered ideologies. On a more constructive note, one can also detect a reforming component of business ethics. In this regard, scholars seek to identify or redefine the goals and responsibilities of corporations and businesses. For instance, they wish to guide and instruct various state and commercial entities about the fair treatment of employees, the importance of diversity in the workplace, as well as our impact on the environment. The problem of the environment leads us to the fourth and last class of ethical studies called environmental ethics. Besides drawing attention to the destructive effects of our economic activity on the planet, this ethics militates for more sustainable policies aligned with our environmental duties. Secondly, it struggles for the preservation and increase of biodiversity. Precisely for this reason, one of the most promising offshoots of this field in more recent years has been animal rights. Perhaps to the surprise of many, the size of this particular problem has proven to be enormous. And the solution to it is not necessarily easy, since pro-animal rights policies may be at variance with other similarly praiseworthy policies designed to relieve hunger, to tackle economic underdevelopment, to raise living standards, or to improve the health of a given population. Well, this is my tentative tableau of the many facets of ethical thinking in the European culture for more than 2 millennia. It is now time to infuse some life into this rather abstract picture by analyzing 4 very different moral worldviews whose significance for our personal and social lives cannot be exaggerated. And if in part 5 I started with the immortal Plato, Here too, I will begin our story with the other greatest figure of European antiquity, Aristotle. See you all very soon, and many thanks for watching.